Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Gokhale. I am a senior consultant with Lifescience Dynamics based in their London office. And today I'll be talking to you about leveraging patient voice to help uncover market potential. Just getting the slides up. So in today's talk, we'll be going over three topics, trying to answer three important questions. Firstly, how is patient's voice shaping drug development? How can patient perspectives inform commercial decisions? And finally, what are the ingredients for conducting an effective market research study with patients and caregivers? So let's get this started. So pharma has a truly unique business model, as all of you may have known and experienced for a while now, where most of the customers of pharma companies are doctors who prescribe the drugs, and they are the ones who make the decisions about who gets which drug, essentially, right? And the end customers or the patients are just the recipients of the drugs without having too much to say in what that product is which is being consumed. To add to the complexity, there are payers who make the decisions about what gets paid, to what extent, and who does it get paid for. So if you compare this to the decision and process of somebody going out and buying an iPhone or almost any other retail good, you start to understand the complexity of the interplay that happens, and the complex market dynamic that exists, which can take the power of decision away from the person who is the end beneficiary. So it's natural that the voice of the patient has not always had the kind of weight in commercial decision making in the pharma industry, as is the case with most other industries where the end customer is one of the most important stakeholders. And while the opinion of HCPs and peers has always been increasing and it's been intently heard and acted upon by the industry, listening to patients is something that's still kind of catching up. But its importance to life science companies is definitely on the rise. The trend has, however, received a somewhat of a boost with the healthcare ecosystem as a whole, making a concerted push toward soliciting patient input in their decision making. For example, regulatory authorities like the FDA, the EMA, NIH, and NICE of the UK have all begun inviting patients for their perspectives and advice in their decision making. Some of you may know that FDA runs something called the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative and has conducted over 25 disease-specific meetings. And they also encourage patient advocacy groups to follow the model and conduct such meetings externally with the patients from different disease communities and their caregivers and other decision makers in their day-to-day life as well. The input received from these meetings can then inform FDA's decisions and oversight both during the drug development and during review of marketing applications. The other area where patient voice is being increasingly heard is in the domain of medical publications. And we have seen reputed medical journals such as the PMJ have patients included in their editorial boards. They have patients author content, as well as act as peer reviewers. Thirdly, we're also beginning to see medical conferences stepping up patient involvement in planning as presenters and in the audience. OMERACT, or Outcome Measures in Rheumatology, has been an exemplary conference in this respect, because starting way back in 2002, they've had at least some conference presence or patient presence at conferences, which happen every 2 years. And by now it has grown to as much as 10% of attendees, more than 10% of attendees being patients. So with these kind of developments becoming increasingly common, it is becoming quite important for pharma and biotech industry to continue incorporating patient voice in commercial decision-making process at all relevant points from early stage development right through launch and after launch. So that's where primary market research comes in, and the focus for the rest of my talk today will be this particular area, focusing on involvement of patients and caregivers as active participants in the research. So before we see what this research entails, let's first try to understand why is it important. So what are the perspectives and insights we can get from patients that could be really useful in informing commercial decisions? Most patient research is focused on understanding unmet need, and patients have a significant amount of say in choosing treatments and treatments that they take, especially so when there are multiple treatment options available that do not always have a clinical differentiation or a differentiation to a degree that's meaningful to the patient. So valuable insights from patients can be gathered, and they can be divided into three broad categories. So firstly, I'm going to talk about the logistical and physical types of insights. These are clearly defined attributes that we're looking for, that patients and caregivers experience directly and are potentially the easiest to understand and straightforward to address. These include things such as dosing and administration, formulation preferences, or preference for a certain regimen, etc. Then we have the intangible or emotional kind of or category of insights. These are the unspoken subliminal drivers behind patient behavior and their decisions. So these can be some of the most difficult ones to surface, but they are the ones that may provide some of the most powerful, actionable insights. For example, what leads to a patient to seek care from a particular type of specialist? What does a favorable outcome, quote unquote, mean to a patient? Or what kind of level of quality, excuse me, what kind and level of quality of life improvement would be considered an acceptable trade-off for, say, a few more months of prolonged life? These are the kind of questions that are really difficult to answer in superficial conversations or surveys, etc. Often it's quite interesting as well to follow the patient's journey from their own perspective. And just the way doctors can speak to differences between the different patients they see with the same diagnosis, patients can help shed light on the differences in the roles, attitudes, and relationships with different healthcare providers that they encounter across the referral chain, and also help shed light on potential barriers to seeking care that they experience and any unmet needs that the treating physicians may be simply unaware of. Finally, last but not least, is the third category related to usage and value communication. So this helps inform if the way in which product information is being conveyed is clear, accurate, impactful, well received, and is critical to designing a successful branding and messaging campaign that has patients and caregivers as intended audience. So now, with so much to offer, there's really no reason to doubt the value that patient and caregiver research could provide at various stages of the product development and launch cycle. In the early stages of clinical development, this could help inform the choice of endpoints, and in particular, patient-reported outcome metrics, which more and more trials have started incorporating from phase 2 onward in order to support their HEOR and real-world data evidence generation strategies. Information on dosing route preferences and receptivity to complex dosing regimens can also be quite useful to gather at this early stage. As we move closer to launch, patient and caregiver opinion can be solicited and used to complement HCP market research in understanding the attitudes and behaviors of patients vis-a-vis those of HCPs. And these are central to brand strategy and are best explored well before launch, where we can then use them to understand HCP education needs around referrals and patient selection. In the pre-launch phase, the focus then shifts to communication, as I alluded to before. Patient feedback is again critical here in designing and refining branding concepts, messages, brochures, websites, TV adverts, etc. And finally, in the post-launch phase, research can help identify knowledge gaps that are potential barriers to product utilization and uncover ways in which they could be addressed. Now that we have tried to understand where patient voice fits in and what it can give us in what help it can give us in commercial decision making, let's now focus at how do we bring about different strategies and tools and techniques to ensure that patient market research is conducted in an effective, productive, and successful manner. As most of you might be familiar with HCP market research, I'm going to try and compare and contrast the two. So first, let's look at the points of similarity that patient research has with HCP research. To begin with, we define research objectives in advance and design the study accordingly. Then we choose a fielding methodology. So this could be a survey, an interview, group discussion, etc., based on the research needs. And then we develop a screener to ensure that the patients that we are recruiting for the study are the right kinds of patient, they're the right fit, they are capable of responding to the type of questions we have, they have the relevant experience for that. And then we conduct outreach to recruit these patients. Now, with outreach, the exact methodology is a bit different than it is for HCPs, and I'll speak about that a bit more detail further on. But in principle, it's the same, where you have to let it be known that there's a study happening and find interested people and participants in taking the screener, and then moving on to recruitment scheduling from there. Finally, the fielding itself is quite similar as well, with central location-based setting for in-person research and teleconferencing or other web-based techniques for virtual research. So that's about the remote side of things. And before we go into further topics relating specifically to conduct of patient research, I do want to take a minute to touch upon the importance and role of caregivers. So decision to involve caregivers alongside or instead of patients can also have a big impact on the success of the research. And there are certain circumstances where obtaining caregiver perspective is as important, if not more important, than talking to patients. So this is particularly important when patients are children or elderly. There are also circumstances when patients may not be in an adequately fit state of mind to assess their own condition or speak for themselves. For example, those suffering from severe neurological conditions or those who are terminally ill. Caregivers can also provide a unique perspective, as they may be the primary decision makers when it comes to treatment. Again, going back to situations where people are infirm or minors, and they also may be the primary cost bearers, and and any kind of treatment decision directly affects them in a material manner. So understanding their unmet needs and what barriers they face and what they would like to happen, it becomes quite critical. Going back to comparing and contrasting HCP and patient research, now let's look at some of the key differences in between HCP and patient research, and these will kind of elucidate what those critical success factors are that we need to make sure we have covered in every patient market research study. So Firstly, patient recruitment tends to be more resource intensive and time consuming than HCP recruitment. So where we have these opt-in panels of HCPs for market research, nothing like that exists for patients, obviously. And what has to happen then is the outreach then has to go through patient advocacy groups, which is the preferred method for rare diseases, or we can have HCPs refer patients to us. So these are in-panel HCPs who have signed up to also being patient referrals. Further, this is complicated by typically lower response rate and incidence rate among patients and caregivers as compared to HCPs. So all in all, one needs to budget more time and more money to conduct a patient research study than an equally sized HCP study. And this is despite the lower fair market value incentive payments are made to patients. As patients have very little to no prior experience of participating in market research surveys and interviews, the design of research material needs to take this into account. And by that, what I mean is that we need to make sure that technical terms and concepts are their use is minimized, and where they are necessary, they need to be kind of toned down or brought down to the level of layman language. Another trick to maximize productivity is to front load some of the ideation needed by, say, providing pre-reads and or requesting pre-work, such as asking patients to annotate a patient journey schematic with their own experiences, or asking them to fill out a medication diary in advance of the actual live interaction. And these things can go a long way in making the actual interaction with the moderator during the interview much more productive. Finally, to realize the full potential of the effort and planning that's been put into a research study like this, up to this extent, the next step becomes extremely crucial, which is encouraging the patients or caregivers to open up and really share when the live interaction is happening. So let's look at that a bit more detail here. To put it very simply, there are three things. Easy to remember acronym is PET, so person, environment, and technique. Moderators who are experienced in patient research are able to make the patients comfortable early on with their demeanor, their tone, and by demonstrating empathy and helping the patient open up, especially when the insights are sought are of the intangible emotional nature. It's extremely important that a well-trained, experienced moderator conducts these interviews. Now, with the environment, if the research is happening in person, having a casual, welcoming setting or environment could aid in having a more open conversation. Although this is more difficult to achieve when connecting through technology barriers, stress on participants can be minimized to a great extent by choosing platforms that have simple interface and need minimal user intervention. Finally, the use of behavioral interview techniques and simple props such as iconic cards and block tree diagrams can help provide the necessary starting point for discussions that lead to uncovering deeper doctor-patient relationships or doctor-patient caregiver interrelationships, which are particularly harder to surface. Now, while patient research is not easy to do, and more so in a world where this is more of a case in a world where now travel and in-person meetings are becoming less and less common. So before I conclude, I would be remiss to not touch upon internet-based tools and techniques available to allow such research to be conducted completely virtually, but still be as productive as as research performed in person. So broadly, they can be grouped into three categories. First, we have video interview platforms, which are mainly focused at qualitative research. And while qualitative research design is most favored for patient research, especially when insights sought are of the emotional, intangible nature, interviews rely heavily on moderator skill, as we just discussed. As the interaction is direct and time-bound, it also means that respondents may not fully open up in the moment and speak about only most top of mind things that they have, and the deeper thoughts may and feelings may not be surfaced. Then we have, of course, online survey platforms for more of a quantitative kind of research. And these are good to get a quick read on topics related to physical, logistical aspects, but are not that well suited for more detailed probing and exploration on emotional topics. Finally, we have online bulletin board platforms, for example, the iAd board. And these are community format bulletin board platforms, and they tend to bring together the best of both worlds. Patients and caregivers can log in and answer questions at their leisure during a fixed period of time of several days. And they can type in the responses, see the responses from other people, such as themselves. And this really helps open things up and prods them into sharing deeper, because they're hearing similar patients and caregivers talk about their own problems and their own experiences. So a lot of those psychological barriers can be broken down by creating this community instead of relying on a single moderator to help the patient open up. Also, since this takes place over a bit of a period of time, there's chance for self-reflection and automatically causes a deeper set of insights to come up. Okay, so to sum up, the importance of market research with patients and caregivers has been growing for some time now and is expected to keep growing further. As the industry embraces patient centricity as a core business value, the role of patient voice and insights sourced from patient experiences is going to keep evolving and growing, and is going to necessitate the use of innovative tools and techniques. This is all to enable us to dig out those golden nuggets of information that can help shape commercial strategy decisions and make the difference between success and failure in an increasingly competitive pharmaceutical marketplace. So this is the future of market research, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for your kind attention. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I look forward to answering any questions from the audience. Thank you so much.